Dr. Sarah Kamani wiped the sweat from her forehead as she examined the dark metallic rocks scattered across the remote hillside in eastern Kenya. As a senior geologist with the Kenya Geological Survey, she had spent 15 years exploring the country's mineral resources, but something about these particular samples made her heart race with excitement. The small mining team had been conducting routine surveys near the Kenyan-Ethiopian border when they stumbled upon unusual rock formations that didn't match anything in their geological maps. The local Turkana community had known about these heavy stones for generations, using them as markers for water sources and grazing boundaries. Children often played with the shiny fragments, completely unaware of their incredible value. Sarah carefully collected samples in numbered bags, her hands trembling slightly as she realized the potential significance of her find. The rocks were unusually dense and had a distinctive bluish-black coloration, with metallic streaks running through them. Her portable testing equipment gave readings that seemed almost impossible to believe. "This can't be right," she muttered to herself, running the tests again and again. Each time the results showed extremely high concentrations of tantalum and niobium, the key components of coltan, one of the world's most valuable minerals. Coltan, short for columbite tantalite, is essential for manufacturing smartphones, laptops, electric car batteries, and virtually every modern electronic device. Most of the world's supply comes from the Democratic Republic of Congo, where mining conditions are often dangerous and controlled by various armed groups. The global technology industry has been desperately searching for alternative sources. Back in Nairobi, Sarah worked late into the night in her laboratory, running more sophisticated tests on the samples. The results were beyond her wildest dreams. The ore quality was exceptional, some of the purest coltan deposits ever discovered. But it wasn't just the quality that shocked her. It was the quantity. Using advanced geological modeling software, she began calculating the potential size of the deposit based on the samples and survey data. The numbers that appeared on her computer screen made her gasp audibly. If her calculations were correct, this wasn't just another mineral find, this was potentially the largest coltan deposit ever discovered on Earth. She called her supervisor, Dr. James Mwangi, despite the late hour. "James, you need to come to the lab immediately," she said, her voice barely containing her excitement. "I think we found something that could change Kenya's economic future forever." When Dr. Mwangi arrived, Sarah showed him the test results and her preliminary calculations. His experienced eyes widened as he reviewed the data. "Sarah, are you absolutely certain about these numbers?" he asked, his voice filled with disbelief. "I've run the test 12 times, she replied. "I've checked and double-checked every calculation. Based on our geological surveys and core samples, we're looking at a deposit that could be worth approximately $7 trillion US. The two scientists sat in stunned silence, fully understanding the magnitude of their discovery. $7 trillion worth of coltan could transform Kenya from a developing nation into one of the world's wealthiest countries overnight. It represented more money than the entire GDP of most nations combined. But with such an enormous discovery came equally enormous challenges. Word of a find this size would attract attention from governments, corporations, and possibly criminal organizations worldwide. The political implications alone could destabilize the entire region. Dr. Mwangi made a decision that would prove crucial in the coming weeks. "Sarah, we cannot let this information leak before we have proper security measures in place. We need to involve the highest levels of government immediately. But we must be extremely careful about who we trust." As dawn broke over Nairobi, Sarah and James prepared to make the most important phone call of their careers. They were about to inform President William Ruto's administration about a discovery that could reshape not just Kenya's future, but potentially the entire global economy. The small samples of dark rock sitting on Sarah's desk represented more than just valuable minerals. They represented hope for millions of Kenyans living in poverty, the potential for massive infrastructure development, world-class healthcare and education systems, and the opportunity to become a major player on the world stage. However, both geologists understood that their discovery also represented danger. History was filled with examples of resource-rich countries that had been exploited, invaded, or torn apart by civil war due to valuable natural resources. The resource curse had afflicted many African nations, where mineral wealth benefited only a few while the majority remained poor. As they prepared to make their report, Sarah couldn't help but think about the Turkana children who had played with fragments of what might be the world's most valuable rocks, completely unaware that they were handling pieces of Kenya's golden future. President William Ruto was in the middle of reviewing budget proposals when his chief of staff knocked urgently on his office door. "Mr. President, Dr. James Mwangi from the Geological Survey is here with what he claims is extremely urgent national security information." Within minutes, Dr. Mwangi and Dr. Kimani were seated in the presidential office, their classified report spread across the mahogany desk. As Ruto read through the geological findings, his expression shifted from curiosity to amazement to deep concern. $7 trillion, the president asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Are you absolutely certain these calculations are correct?" Sarah nodded confidently. "Mr. President, we've conducted extensive testing. We've brought in independent verification from 3 different laboratories. The deposit extends much deeper and wider than we initially thought. Conservative estimates put the value at $7 trillion, but it could be significantly more." Ruto stood up and walked to the window overlooking Nairobi's bustling streets. Below him, millions of Kenyans went about their daily lives, completely unaware that their country had just become potentially the wealthiest nation on earth. The irony wasn't lost on him. Many of these people struggled to afford basic necessities while sitting on top of unimaginable wealth. "Who else knows about this discovery?" he asked, turning back to face the geologists. "Only the 3 of us in this room," Dr. Mwangi replied. "We understood the sensitive nature of this information and came directly to you." The president called an emergency meeting with his most trusted advisors, including Defense Minister Aden Duale, Treasury Cabinet Secretary Njuguna Ndungu, and National Security Advisor Monica Juma. As each official learned about the discovery, their reactions ranged from excitement to worry about the challenges ahead. Defense Minister Duale was the first to voice serious concerns. "Mr. President, a discovery of this magnitude will attract international attention we may not be prepared for. We need to immediately secure the area and develop a comprehensive defense strategy." Treasury Secretary Ndungu was already calculating the economic implications. If managed properly, this discovery could eliminate poverty in Kenya within a generation. We could build world-class infrastructure, provide free education and healthcare, and transform our entire economy. But we must be extremely careful about how we proceed. National Security Advisor Juma raised perhaps the most crucial point. "Mr. President, history shows us what happens to countries with valuable natural resources. Look at the Democratic Republic of Congo with their coltan mines, or Iraq with oil, or Sierra Leone with diamonds. We could face everything from international pressure to attempted coups to foreign intervention." The president made his first major decision regarding the discovery. "We will classify this information at the highest security level. Only people in this room and the original discovery team will have access to this information until we develop a comprehensive plan." Over the following days, the government quietly began implementing security measures. Military units were discreetly repositioned to the discovery area under the pretense of routine border patrols. The site was declared a temporary restricted zone for environmental studies. Meanwhile, Sarah and her small team continued their geological surveys, working under heavy security protection they were told was for wildlife safety. Each day brought new discoveries that made the deposit seem even larger and more valuable. International mining companies began to take notice of increased activity in eastern Kenya, but they assumed it was related to existing copper and gold exploration projects. Samsung, Apple, Tesla, and other technology companies that desperately needed reliable coltan sources had no idea that Kenya might soon control the world's largest supply. President Ruto privately consulted with several trusted international allies, including former President Obama, who had maintained close ties to Kenya. These conversations were carefully framed as discussions about general economic development, but experienced politicians could sense something significant was happening. The Chinese government, always alert to mineral discoveries in Africa, began quietly increasing their diplomatic presence in Kenya. Chinese mining companies submitted proposals for various projects across the country, hoping to position themselves advantageously for future opportunities. Local communities near the discovery site noticed the increased security presence and began asking questions. Tribal elders approached government officials, concerned that their traditional grazing lands might be affected by new development projects. Elder Joseph Ekwam, a respected leader among the Turkana people, requested a meeting with local officials. "Our ancestors have lived on this land for thousands of years," he told them. "We want to ensure that our people benefit from whatever development is planned for our territory." The government faced a delicate balancing act. They needed to keep the discovery secret while also beginning to prepare the infrastructure and legal framework necessary to eventually extract and market the coltan. This required careful coordination between multiple government ministries and agencies. Legal experts began reviewing Kenya's mining laws, quickly realizing that existing legislation was inadequate for managing a discovery of this magnitude. New laws would need to be drafted to ensure that the wealth generated would benefit all Kenyans, not just wealthy investors or corrupt officials. As word began to spread through government circles that something major was happening, President Ruto knew he was facing the biggest decision of his presidency. How could Kenya extract and market $7 trillion worth of coltan while avoiding the resource curse that had plagued so many other African nations? The small samples of coltan sitting in the presidential safe represented not just mineral wealth, but the future of 47 million Kenyans. The decisions made in the coming weeks would determine whether this discovery would be a blessing or a curse for generations to come. The secret couldn't be kept forever. 3 weeks after the initial discovery, investigative journalist Maria Santos from Reuters noticed unusual patterns in Kenya's government activities. Increased military presence near the Ethiopian border, closed-door meetings between high-ranking officials, and sudden changes in mining legislation caught her experienced eye. Maria had spent 5 years covering mining stories across Africa and knew the signs of a significant mineral discovery. She began making phone calls to her network of sources within the Kenyan government, mining industry, and local communities. Her breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A laboratory technician in Nairobi, who had processed some of Sarah's samples, mentioned to his brother-in-law that he had never seen such pure coltan specimens. The brother-in-law, who worked as a translator for foreign journalists, immediately understood the significance and contacted Maria. "I can't give you names or specific details," the translator told Maria over coffee in a busy Nairobi cafe, "but I can tell you that someone recently discovered coltan deposits that made my contact extremely excited." He said the samples were unlike anything he had ever seen. Maria spent the next week carefully investigating, cross-referencing government records, satellite imagery, and ground reports from the border region. She noticed that several mining equipment companies had received large orders from government agencies, and international geology consultants had been quietly flying into Kenya. Meanwhile, President Ruto was receiving increasingly urgent reports from his intelligence services. "Mr. President," National Security Advisor Monica Juma informed him during an emergency briefing, "our sources indicate that foreign intelligence agencies are beginning to take notice of our activities. We've detected increased Chinese, American, and European intelligence gathering efforts." The pressure was mounting from multiple directions. Technology companies worldwide were struggling with coltan shortages that were driving up prices for smartphones, electric vehicles, and computers. The global supply chain was heavily dependent on unstable regions, making any potential new source extremely valuable. Dr. Sarah Kimani continued her geological surveys, now working with an international team of experts who had been sworn to secrecy. Each new core sample confirmed what she had suspected. The coltan deposit was even larger than initially estimated. Recent calculations suggested the actual value might exceed $10 trillion. The discovery site had become a carefully controlled area with multiple layers of security. Local communities were told that environmental and archaeological surveys were being conducted, which explained the restricted access and scientific equipment. Elder Joseph Ekwam and other Turkana leaders began organizing community meetings to discuss the government activities in their region. They had lived through previous development projects that promised benefits but delivered little to local people. This time they were determined to ensure their community's interests were protected. "We must be smart about whatever is happening on our land," Elder Ekwam told a gathering of community leaders. "We have seen what happens in other parts of Africa when valuable minerals are discovered. The companies get rich, the government officials get rich, but the local people remain poor." International mining corporations were beginning to circle like vultures. Rio Tinto, BHP Billiton, and Glencore had all increased their presence in Kenya, officially for existing projects but actually hoping to position themselves for new opportunities. Chinese state-owned enterprises were particularly aggressive, offering massive infrastructure investments in exchange for mining rights. The first major leak occurred when a European mining executive mentioned in a private dinner conversation that something big was happening in Kenya. Within hours, this information had reached commodity traders in London and New York, causing subtle but noticeable movements in Coltan futures prices. President Ruto realized that full disclosure was becoming inevitable. He called an emergency cabinet meeting to develop a comprehensive communication strategy. "We have perhaps days, maybe weeks, before this story breaks internationally," he told his ministers. "We need to control the narrative and ensure that Kenya maintains sovereignty over this resource." Treasury Secretary Njuguna Ndungu presented preliminary economic projections that were almost impossible to comprehend. "Mr. President, if managed properly, this discovery could generate enough revenue to give every Kenyan family a middle-class lifestyle within 10 years. We could build infrastructure that rivals any developed nation and establish sovereign wealth funds that would secure prosperity for generations." However, Defense Minister Aden Duale painted a more concerning picture. "Mr. President, our military intelligence indicates that several foreign governments are already developing contingency plans regarding Kenya. We've detected increased satellite surveillance, diplomatic probing, and what appears to be preliminary military assessments." The weight of the situation was enormous. Kenya, a relatively small East African nation, was about to become the center of global attention due to a mineral deposit worth more than the GDP of most countries combined. The decisions made in the coming days would determine whether this would bring prosperity or conflict. Dr. Sarah Kimani found herself at the center of a geological discovery that would be remembered for centuries. As she watched military helicopters flying overhead and international experts examining her samples, she wondered whether her exciting discovery would ultimately be a blessing or a curse for her beloved country. Late that evening, as Maria Santos prepared to publish her investigative report, she had no idea that she was about to trigger a global chain reaction that would affect commodity markets, international relations, and the lives of millions of people across East Africa and beyond. The small samples of coltan that had started this journey were now sitting in highly secure government facilities, but their discovery had set in motion events that no one could fully control or predict. The story broke at 6:47 a.m. Nairobi time on a Tuesday morning. Maria Santos's Reuters report, titled "Massive Coltan Discovery May Transform Kenya into Global Mining Powerhouse," sent shockwaves through international markets before most Kenyans had finished their morning coffee. Within minutes, coltan prices on international commodity exchanges began fluctuating wildly. Technology company stocks experienced significant movements as investors tried to calculate the implications of a new, potentially massive coltan supply. Samsung's stock price jumped 12% in early trading, while shares of companies heavily invested in Congo's coltan mines dropped sharply. President Ruto was awakened by frantic phone calls from his communications director. "Mr. President, the story is everywhere. BBC, CNN, Al Jazeera, every major news outlet is picking it up. Our phones are ringing non-stop with interview requests from international media." By 8 a.m., the Kenyan government's carefully planned secrecy had completely unraveled. Social media was buzzing with speculation. Satellite images of the restricted zone were being analyzed by amateur geologists worldwide, and international mining companies were scrambling to contact Kenyan officials. Dr. Sarah Kimani arrived at her office to find dozens of journalists camped outside the Geological Survey building. Security guards had to escort her through the crowd, as reporters shouted questions in multiple languages. "Dr. Kimani, can you confirm the $7 trillion estimate? How pure is the coltan? When will mining operations begin?" The international response was swift and intense. The Chinese ambassador to Kenya requested an immediate meeting with President Ruto. The American embassy issued a statement congratulating Kenya on the discovery while expressing hope for continued partnership in responsible mining practices. European Union representatives began discussing potential trade agreements. Most concerning for the Kenyan government were the more subtle responses. Intelligence reports indicated that several foreign military attachés were suddenly very interested in Kenya's defense capabilities. Private military contractors began making inquiries about potential security contracts. Elder Joseph Ekwam woke up to find his small village surrounded by journalists, mining company representatives, and government officials. Overnight, our quiet community has become the center of the world's attention, he told his fellow elders. We must be very careful about how we handle this situation. The Turkana community quickly organized and demanded immediate representation in all discussions about the Coltan deposit. They hired a Nairobi law firm specializing in indigenous rights and natural resource law, determined not to be marginalized as development proceeded. International technology companies began arriving in Nairobi within hours of the news breaking. Apple sent a discreet team of supply chain executives. Tesla's battery procurement specialists booked flights to Kenya. Chinese electronics manufacturers dispatched negotiating teams with authority to make immediate deals. The economic implications became clear very quickly. Kenya's currency, the shilling, strengthened significantly against major international currencies as foreign exchange markets anticipated massive future export revenues. The Nairobi Stock Exchange experienced its largest single-day gain in history. However, not all reactions were positive. Environmental groups worldwide expressed immediate concerns about potential ecological damage from large-scale coltan mining. Greenpeace issued a statement calling for the highest environmental standards to be applied to any extraction operations. Human rights organizations, drawing lessons from coltan mining in the Democratic Republic of Congo, demanded transparency and community involvement in all mining operations. Kenya has an opportunity to show the world how valuable mineral resources can be extracted responsibly, stated a representative from Human Rights Watch. President Ruto decided to address the nation directly. In a televised speech that evening, he confirmed the discovery but emphasized Kenya's commitment to responsible development. This discovery represents unprecedented opportunity for all Kenyans, he declared. But we will not allow the mistakes made in other countries to be repeated here. The president announced the formation of a national coltan development committee, including representatives from local communities, environmental groups, religious organizations, and civil society. Every Kenyan will benefit from this discovery, he promised. We will establish a sovereign wealth fund to ensure that future generations share in this blessing. International mining companies began submitting preliminary proposals within days of the announcement. Rio Tinto offered a joint venture that would invest $10 billion in infrastructure development. Chinese state-owned enterprises proposed even larger investments, including railways, ports, and power generation facilities. Dr. Sarah Kamani found herself thrust into international spotlight she never wanted. Geology journals requested detailed papers about her discovery methods. International mining conferences invited her as a keynote speaker. Several universities offered her prestigious academic positions, but the attention wasn't entirely welcome. Sarah began receiving threatening phone calls from unknown sources, warning her to be careful about her geological findings. The government assigned her personal security protection after intelligence services detected several attempts to hack her email, accounts, and personal devices. The discovery site became a heavily fortified area almost overnight. Kenya Defense Forces established a permanent base nearby, officially for environmental protection, but actually to secure what had become Kenya's most valuable real estate. Local communities near the deposit found their lives completely transformed. Land values skyrocketed as speculators began purchasing property near the mining area. Young men who had been herding cattle suddenly found themselves offered high-paying jobs with security companies and construction firms. Traditional leaders like Elder Ekwam faced unprecedented challenges. Mining companies sent representatives with briefcases full of cash, offering personal payments in exchange for community support. They think they can buy our approval with money, he told his council. But this land belongs to our children and grandchildren. Any agreements we make must benefit them for generations to come. As the first week after the announcement concluded, Kenya found itself at the center of global attention in ways both exciting and terrifying. The small East African nation was about to become one of the world's most important countries. But with that importance came dangers that few Kenyans had ever imagined. 6 months after the discovery became public, Kenya had transformed into something unrecognizable. The dusty road leading to the Coltan deposit was now a modern highway, built by Chinese construction companies. Luxury hotels in Nairobi were booked solid with mining executives, technology company representatives, and international investors. President Ruto stood before the United Nations General Assembly, delivering a speech that would reshape global conversations about resource extraction and national sovereignty. Kenya will demonstrate that African nations can control their own natural resources for the benefit of their own people, he declared to thunderous applause from developing nation representatives. The Kenyan government had learned important lessons from other resource-rich countries. Instead of rushing into extraction, they spent months developing comprehensive legal frameworks, environmental protections, and community benefit programs. The National Coltan Development Committee, chaired by Elder Joseph Ekwam, had real power to approve or reject mining proposals. Dr. Sarah Kimani had become one of the world's most famous geologists. Her discovery was being studied in universities globally as an example of how proper geological surveying could identify previously unknown mineral wealth. She now led the Kenya Institute for Strategic Mineral Research, a new government agency with a budget larger than many countries' entire ministries. However, the transformation hadn't been entirely smooth. Several attempted cyber attacks on government systems had been traced to foreign intelligence services. 3 separate attempts to bribe government officials with massive sums had been detected and publicized, embarrassing the countries involved. The most serious challenge came from international pressure to begin immediate extraction. Technology companies facing coltan shortages had offered increasingly desperate terms for supply contracts. Tesla CEO Elon Musk personally flew to Nairobi to negotiate directly with President Ruto, offering to build Africa's largest electric vehicle manufacturing plant in exchange for guaranteed coltan supplies. Local communities had experienced dramatic changes in their daily lives. Young Turkana men who had never owned smartphones now worked as security guards, earning salaries higher than university professors. Traditional pastoralist families found themselves negotiating mineral rights agreements worth millions of dollars. Mary Akiru, a young Turkana woman who had completed secondary school before the discovery, now managed a community development fund worth $50 million. 2 years ago, I was herding goats, she reflected during a community meeting. Now I'm responsible for ensuring that mining revenues improve education and healthcare for our entire region. The environmental challenges proved significant but manageable. Kenya had insisted on the world's strictest environmental standards for coltan extraction, learning from the ecological disasters in other mining regions. International environmental groups, initially skeptical, began praising Kenya's approach as a model for responsible resource development. Advanced extraction technologies, including automated mining systems and closed-loop processing facilities, minimized environmental impact while maximizing efficiency. The mining operation employed more engineers and technicians than traditional laborers, creating high-paying jobs for educated Kenyans. Kenya's economy experienced unprecedented growth. GDP increased by 340% in the first year after mining began. The government's sovereign wealth fund, fed by coltan revenues, grew to over $200 billion within 18 months. Every Kenyan citizen received monthly dividends from the fund, effectively eliminating absolute poverty nationwide. Infrastructure development accelerated at remarkable pace. Chinese and European companies competed to build railways, airports, and telecommunications networks. Nairobi transformed into a gleaming modern city, with world-class public transportation, while rural areas received electricity, clean water, and internet connectivity. Education became a national priority, funded by coltan revenues. Kenya established full scholarships for any citizen pursuing higher education, either domestically or internationally. The University of Nairobi expanded into one of Africa's premier research institutions, attracting faculty and students from around the world. Healthcare improvements were equally dramatic. Kenya built modern hospitals in every county, recruited international medical specialists, and provided free health care for all citizens. Life expectancy increased significantly, and infant mortality rates dropped to developed world levels. However, success brought new challenges. Other African countries began pressuring Kenya to share mining technologies and expertise. Some neighboring nations claimed that coltan deposits might extend across borders, creating potential territorial disputes. International relations became increasingly complex. Kenya found itself courted by every major world power. The United States offered military partnerships and technology transfers. China proposed massive infrastructure investments. European countries suggested special trade relationships. President Ruto navigated these pressures carefully, maintaining Kenya's independence while building beneficial relationships with multiple partners. "We will be friends to all but servants to none," became his administration's foreign policy motto. The Turkana community, once among Kenya's most marginalized, had become the country's wealthiest region per capita. Traditional leaders like Elder Ekwam worked with government officials and international development experts to ensure that sudden wealth didn't destroy cultural traditions and social structures. Dr. Sarah Kimani continued her geological research, now leading teams searching for additional mineral deposits throughout East Africa. Her discovery methods were being adopted by geological surveys worldwide, leading to new mineral finds in several countries. As the second year of mining operations concluded, Kenya had achieved something unprecedented in African resource development. The country had avoided the resource curse that had plagued so many other nations, instead using mineral wealth to build a modern, prosperous society that benefited all citizens. The small samples of coltan that Sarah had first examined in her laboratory had indeed transformed into something much larger than anyone had imagined, not just mineral wealth, but a new model for how developing nations could control and benefit from their natural resources. 5 years after Dr. Sarah Kimani first picked up those unusual dark rocks, Kenya had become Africa's wealthiest nation and one of the world's most influential countries. The transformation was so complete that visitors could hardly believe this was the same country that had struggled with poverty and underdevelopment just years earlier. President Ruto, now serving his second term with overwhelming popular support, stood in his modern office overlooking a Nairobi skyline filled with gleaming skyscrapers and green spaces. The city had become a major international business center, hosting headquarters for dozens of multinational corporations and international organizations. The numbers were staggering. Kenya's per capita income had surpassed that of many European countries. The sovereign wealth fund had grown to over $800 billion, making it one of the world's largest. Every Kenyan citizen now received monthly payments equivalent to a middle-class salary, while those who worked earned additional income from the thriving economy. Dr. Sarah Kimani had been awarded the Nobel Prize in Economic Sciences for her discovery's impact on global development theory. Her geological methods had led to significant mineral discoveries in 12 other countries, earning her recognition as the most influential scientist of her generation. But perhaps more importantly, Kenya had proven that African nations could successfully manage vast natural resources. The Kenya model was being studied and adapted by countries worldwide. University programs in resource management and sustainable development drew students from every continent. Elder Joseph Ekwam, now in his 70s, served as chairman of the African Indigenous Resources Council, an organization that helped traditional communities across the continent negotiate fair agreements with mining companies. His small village had become a model community, combining traditional culture with modern amenities. The Turkana region, once isolated and underdeveloped, now boasted world-class universities, hospitals, and research facilities. Young Turkana graduates worked as engineers, doctors, and scientists throughout Africa and beyond, while maintaining strong connections to their cultural heritage. Mary Akiru had become Kenya's youngest cabinet minister, serving as Secretary for Community Development. Her success story inspired millions of young Africans who saw that education and opportunity could transform lives within a single generation. The Coltan mining operation had evolved into a technological marvel. Fully automated systems extracted minerals with minimal environmental impact, while advanced processing facilities produced materials so pure that technology companies paid premium prices. Kenya had become the world's most reliable and highest quality coltan supplier. Environmental protection had exceeded everyone's expectations. The mining region had actually increased its biodiversity, as restoration projects created new habitats for wildlife. Kenya's environmental standards were now copied by mining operations worldwide. International relationships had stabilized around mutual respect and benefit. Kenya maintained strong partnerships with China, the United States, Europe, and other African nations, without becoming dependent on any single country. The nation's foreign policy influence far exceeded its size, as other countries sought Kenya's advice on resource development and economic planning. Technology innovation had flourished as coltan revenues funded massive research and development programs. Kenyan companies had developed new mining technologies, advanced materials processing, and next-generation electronic components. The country had become a major technology exporter, not just a raw materials supplier. Cultural preservation had been successfully balanced with modernization. Traditional Turkana, Kikuyu, Luo, and other communities maintained their languages, customs, and social structures while fully participating in the modern economy. Cultural festivals and traditional arts thrived alongside international business conferences and scientific research. Education achievements were remarkable. Kenya's literacy rate reached 100%, and the country produced more engineers, doctors, and scientists per capita than most developed nations. Kenyan universities attracted international students, while Kenyan students studying abroad often returned home to contribute to their country's continued development. Healthcare outcomes had improved dramatically. Kenya's life expectancy now exceeded that of many wealthy countries, and the nation had eliminated most preventable diseases through comprehensive public health programs funded by coltan revenues. Infrastructure development had connected every corner of the country. High-speed rail networks linked major cities. Rural areas had reliable electricity and internet access, and modern airports facilitated international commerce and tourism. The ripple effects extended far beyond Kenya's borders. Other African countries had negotiated better terms for their natural resources, inspired by Kenya's success. International mining companies had adopted higher environmental and social standards to compete for contracts in the region. Global technology markets had stabilized as Kenya's reliable coltan supply eliminated the shortages and price volatility that had previously disrupted smartphone, electric vehicle, and computer production. Consumer electronics became more affordable worldwide as supply chain concerns diminished. Dr. Sarah Kimani, now director of the International Institute for Geological Discovery, often reflected on that first day when she noticed unusual rocks in a remote Kenyan hillside. Her scientific curiosity had triggered changes that affected billions of people around the world. As Kenya celebrated the 5th anniversary of the coltan discovery, President Ruto announced the establishment of a global development fund that would use Kenya's wealth to support education, healthcare, and infrastructure projects throughout the developing world. The small samples of dark, metallic rock that had started this incredible journey were now displayed in the Kenya National Museum, labeled simply as the rocks that changed the world. Millions of visitors came annually to see these unremarkable-looking minerals that had demonstrated how scientific discovery, responsible leadership, and community involvement could transform not just a country, but provide hope for addressing global inequality and sustainable development. Kenya's story had become proof that with proper planning, strong institutions, and commitment to serving all citizens, natural resource wealth could indeed become a blessing rather than a curse.